Dad's keys landed in the ceramic bowl by the door like a tiny bell that meant, brace yourself. I wiped plaster dust off my forearm, breathing in the sharp scent of fresh paint. Saturday morning. My house. My project. The living room was a mess of drop cloths and roller trays, the kind of chaos that looks like progress. Hey kiddo, Dad called, voice bright, unfamiliar. We brought muffins. She followed him in on a chorus of perfume and bracelets, heels clicking across my tarp. She had the soft focused glow of someone who loves an audience. Gold hoops, a dress the color of ripe peaches, a smile calibrated to look effortless. Hi, she sang like we'd known each other longer than 3 weeks. I've heard so much. I was in overalls and a paint-freckled t-shirt, hair twisted up with a pencil. My name on the electricity bill. My name on the tax receipt. My spine a quiet steel rod. Dad kissed my cheek distractedly, already scanning for the best lighting. He'd become a man who rearranged his life, and mine, by phone notification. We thought we'd stop by, show you the ring. She lifted her hand and the stone caught the sunlight like it had been rehearsing. Soon to be Mrs., she said. The ring did most of the talking. The rest was in her eyes. The quick inventory, the tilt that tries to sort you into before or after. Congratulations, I said, and meant it the way you mean the weather. The muffins were blueberry. The silence was lemon rind, bright and stinging. We made small talk, which is what people do when larger truths are circling the block looking for parking. Dad said wedding venue floral. She said vibes and aesthetic, and we. I let the rollers dry on the tray. Weeks passed and we became the constant hum in my living room. They showed me color palettes for linen napkins, said the word family, until it lost its original shape. Then came her soft hand on her stomach one afternoon, the pause, the smile. Baby, she whispered, to herself, to him, to the room, and the words swelled like a balloon that wanted the whole ceiling. 2 months later she came alone. The house was quiet. Dust motes floated like tiny secrets. She didn't sit. Pack up your things, she said, crisp as an invoice. I need your room. A smug smile, a pat to the curve beneath her dress. You're young, you can live somewhere else. My blood rose like heat from asphalt. I set down the brush deliberately, wiped my hands on a rag and looked her in the eye. When I spoke, my voice was still water. Sweetheart, I said, and watched the words sting. This isn't just a room. The whole house is mine. She blinked once, twice, like she was checking if she'd misheard. The smug curve of her lips faltered for half a second, then rebuilt itself tighter. That's funny, she said, brushing an invisible hair from her shoulder. But you don't need to make this difficult. The baby will need space. I didn't answer. I just walked to the sideboard and pulled open the bottom drawer. The old oak groaned, the way truth does when it's about to be dragged into daylight. Out came a slim folder, thick with paper sleeves, the edges softened by years. Property deed. Purchase receipt. My name, printed in black ink over and over like a drumbeat. I set the folder down between us. Space, I said, is something you should have thought about before deciding to nest in my walls. She didn't touch the papers. Her hand lingered on her belly, thumb tracing lazy circles. You don't mean that. Family works together. I almost laughed. The word family had been thrown around like glitter lately, coating everything until it stuck in places you didn't want it. But this was the first time it felt like a weapon. I remembered the years before Dad got swept up in her orbit. The second job I'd taken to afford this place, the skipped dinners, the smell of damp plaster when I stayed up patching the walls. Every scraped knuckle and empty Friday night was somewhere in these floorboards. I'm not the one making this difficult, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm just reminding you of the facts. She exhaled sharply, scanning the room like it might side with her. When the baby comes, you'll understand. Everything changes. The way she said it wasn't hope, it was warning. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A quick glance. A small smile meant for someone else. We'll talk later, she said, walking toward the door with a sway that said she believed the conversation was already won. I watched her leave, the scent of her perfume lingering like a stubborn thought. My hand rested on the deed. I traced the letters of my own name, grounding myself in the truth. That night Dad called. His voice was lighter than it had been in years. She mentioned you two talked. Let's keep things smooth, all right? For me. For him. Always for him. I hung up without promising a thing. And in that silence, the first line of my plan began to write itself. Plans, I've learned, don't start with explosions. They start with paper. With silence. With listening. For the next 2 weeks I became part of the background. I let her think her words had planted seeds, that I was mulling over the idea of making space. I kept the smile soft, the tone agreeable. People reveal more when they believe they've already won. And she revealed plenty. From the kitchen I overheard her on calls while Dad was at work. He doesn't even use the living room. Once we changed the locks. Another day laughing to someone named Marissa. By Christmas it'll all feel like ours. She spoke about my walls like they were just waiting for her signature. I started keeping a small notebook tucked into my bag. Times. Dates. Fragments of conversations, written down in sharp strokes. I began asking questions too, subtle ones. What kind of crib are you thinking? Where would you put it? She answered without hesitation, mapping out her conquest in casual sentences. Dad, meanwhile, floated in a haze of new love and nursery catalogs. Every time I looked at him, a part of me wanted to shake him awake. Another part just grew colder. One evening she stopped by without him. She stood in the doorway of my bedroom, eyes moving over the bookshelves, the framed photographs, the oak desk I'd saved a year to buy. This would make such a beautiful nursery, she murmured. I didn't reply. I just tilted my head like I was imagining it too. Inside I was measuring, not the room but the limits of her arrogance. The blueprint was simple. Keep her talking. Keep collecting proof. Wait for the right moment to remind her, and Dad, of the one thing she seemed to forget. The house wasn't just bricks and beams. It was mine in ink, in law, in sacrifice. But revenge would be more than reminding. It would be permanent. And it would happen in a way that left her unable to pretend she'd ever had a claim. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I slid the property deed into a new folder. One labeled in bold, black letters. Final. The next morning I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. When they picked up I said just 5 words. It's time to cash in. Her voice on the other end was warm, textured with the years we hadn't spoken. Didn't think I'd hear from you again, she said. Didn't think I'd need to call, I replied. But I've got a situation. And you're the only one who can help me make it unmissable. Her name was Lila. A real estate agent who'd once been my neighbor and, more importantly, someone who knew how to make an ownership line shine brighter than a diamond. She'd helped me close on this house when I was barely 30, talking me through each clause, warning me where people try to wriggle through. We set a meeting for the next afternoon. I made sure Dad would be at work and she would be out shopping for nursery paint. Lila arrived with a leather folder and that same knowing smile from years ago. All right, she said, laying papers across my dining table. Let's remind the world whose name is on these walls. We went through everything, the purchase agreement, the title, the lien release. Then Lila leaned back, tapping her pen. If she tries to stake a claim, she'll find herself up against this. And the fact that you've been the sole payer of every bill, every tax. I nodded slowly. I don't just want to keep her out, Lila. I want her to know she was never in. Her smile was sharp. Then let's make it public. We drafted an announcement. A fake listing, dressed up in careful language, that the property was under exclusive ownership and not accepting cohabitation agreements. It wasn't illegal. It was, however, impossible to miss if you had certain alerts set up. 2 days later I accidentally left a printout of the listing on the kitchen counter. Right beside her pregnancy vitamins. When she saw it she froze. What's this? Oh, I said lightly. Just making sure everything is clear in case anyone gets confused about who owns this place. Her nostrils flared, a flicker of something dangerous behind her eyes. You think you're clever? No, I said, my voice calm, almost kind. I know I am. That night Dad called again. His tone was tighter this time. She's upset. Can you just ease up? I looked at the deed on my desk, then out at the dark street. Tell her, I said, to stop planning my eviction. I hung up before he could reply. Because the next move wasn't his to make. The shift was subtle at first. He stopped lingering in the kitchen when I was around. Her laughter, once loud enough to bleed through walls, became sharp, short, almost rehearsed. Dad had that restless way of speaking, like every sentence was balancing on a question he didn't want to ask. It didn't take long for the first real crack to show. I came home one evening to find a folded piece of paper on the hall table. My name wasn't on it, but my curiosity was. I opened it slowly. It was a proposal, a typed, bullet-pointed, mutual arrangement for me to relocate in a timely manner, in exchange for a goodwill payment of exactly $1,500. $1,500. For the room I'd bought with my 20s. For the walls I'd painted while my friends traveled, the floors I'd scrubbed after 12-hour shifts. It was insulting, not because of the number but because it was the price she thought my silence was worth. I left the note where it was and went to my room, my mind already turning over the possibilities. The next morning I invited an appraiser over. Not for me but for her. I made sure the visit coincided with her afternoon rest, the time she usually spent scrolling through baby name forums in the living room. When the appraiser arrived, I welcomed him warmly, spoke clearly about the property, about my improvements over the years, about ownership. Loud enough that every word threaded through the hallway and into the room where she sat. She emerged 10 minutes later, all polite smile and clipped tone. I wasn't aware we were selling. We aren't, I said. Just updating my records. Owners should know what their property is worth. Her jaw tightened. She retreated, but her footsteps were heavier than before. That night, Dad confronted me in the kitchen. She's pregnant. Can't you just be kinder? I held his gaze. Kindness isn't letting someone steal from you, Dad. He flinched like I'd said something vulgar. Maybe I had. Maybe the truth was just vulgar when it didn't serve you. I knew then this wasn't going to end with polite documents and folded notes. No, this was going to take something sharper. Something final. And I had just the invitation to make it happen. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, hand-delivered by her with a brightness that felt rehearsed. Dinner, she said, placing it in my hand. For family. Inside was a cream card with gold lettering, celebrating the engagement of Daniel and Claire. My father's name. Her name. Not mine. The venue. A small, high-ceilinged restaurant downtown, the kind with linen napkins and soft jazz that makes you lean closer to speak. I could have ignored it. I could have stayed home. But this was the perfect stage. On the night of the dinner I wore black, clean lines, quiet elegance. I arrived early, speaking briefly with the maitre d', before taking my place at the end of the table. The restaurant was warm, the air smelling faintly of rosemary and wine. They arrived 20 minutes later, she glowing in pale silk, Dad in a navy jacket he'd probably bought just for the occasion. Guests trickled in. Her friends, a couple of his co-workers, people who looked at me with polite curiosity. The chatter was easy at first. Glasses clinked, laughter rose. Then she tapped her glass with a fork. Everyone, she began, thank you for being here to celebrate our future. Her hand went to her stomach. And our growing family. The applause was automatic. Smiles all around. Then she looked at me, her expression the kind that's meant to be gracious but lands just shy of condescending. And of course, we'll soon be making some changes at home to prepare for the baby. Everyone's been so supportive. The air shifted. My fork rested on my plate. I felt the room's attention swing toward me, subtle but undeniable. I set my napkin down, stood and let the quiet spread for just long enough. Since we're all here, I began, my voice even, I think it's the perfect time to clear something up. From my bag I pulled the folder, the same one with the deed, the bills, the receipts. I placed it on the table like an extra course no one had ordered. This house you're talking about changing? I said, meeting each pair of eyes. It's mine. Paid for in full. Every bill, every tax. There will be no moving me out, because legally that's impossible. A ripple moved through the room. He laughed, too quickly. Oh, she's just. I cut her off, not unkindly. Claire, you might be carrying my father's child. But don't mistake that for ownership of my life or my home. The silence that followed was the cleanest sound I'd ever heard. And it was only the opening act. The dinner limped on after that, but the air never recovered. People still chewed, still murmured, but the warmth was gone. Forks moved like they were afraid to scrape the plates too loudly. Claire tried to pull it back, leaning harder into charm, making small jokes about pregnancy hormones, and how we women get a little protective. But every laugh she earned was thinner than the last. Dad kept his eyes on his wine, swirling it like it held an answer. I didn't push further, not yet. Silence, when used well, can be louder than a scene. After dessert, guests began to drift out. I thanked them each quietly, keeping my tone light. One of Dad's coworkers, a man I barely knew, squeezed my arm and said under his breath, "Smart of you to speak up. People forget how fast lines can get crossed." By the time I got home, the plan's final piece had fallen into place. The next morning I called Lila again. "List it," I said simply. "Sell the house?" she asked. "Not exactly. Just enough to make it clear it's my choice who lives here. Let's make the listing public, price high enough to scare off any buyers, but visible enough that anyone searching the address will see who the legal owner is." She understood instantly. Within 48 hours the listing went live, complete with professional photos of every room, my name prominently displayed as the sole contact. I didn't need to send Claire the link. People in her circle found it for her. That evening she stormed in while Dad was still at work. "What is this?" she demanded, shoving her phone toward me. The listing glared back, glossy and undeniable. "It's my house," I said simply. "And I decide who gets to stay." Her voice rose, her composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to your father?" "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm showing him the truth. You were never here to build a family. You were here to build a claim. And now that door is closed." She stared at me, breathing hard. Then, with a shake of her head, she left without another word. When Dad came home he didn't mention it. But I saw the flicker in his expression, the first hint of doubt. The kind that doesn't go away. And I knew by the weekend, everything would change. The weekend arrived wrapped in gray clouds, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that warns of a break. Dad came by mid-morning, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking between me and the floor. "Claire wasn't with him. She's staying with her sister for now," he said finally. "She feels unwelcome." I let the words hang there, waiting for him to fill them. He didn't. Instead, I handed him a single sheet of paper, a notarized statement confirming my sole ownership of the property, with an addendum I'd filed that morning. No changes to occupancy without my written consent. The legal equivalent of a deadbolt. His eyes scanned it, slow, deliberate. I saw the moment it landed, the way his shoulders sank, the way his voice lost its fight. "You really went this far?" "I had to," I said quietly. "Because you wouldn't." Outside, the clouds finally broke, rain tapping against the windows like a slow applause. He set the paper down, nodded once, and left without another word. An hour later I turned the new key in the front door, the one only I had. The house was silent. Thought, my